The city that lives behind the eyes. The parchment was never just paper to Elias Thorne. It was a sensory experience. As a master cartographer in an age where the world had already been thoroughly conquered and digitized, Elias lived for the scratch of the quill and the scent of iron gall ink. But lately, the maps had begun to breathe. It started with a small, unsolicited sketch of a cobblestone alleyway in the corner of a commission. That night, Elias dreamt of that alleyway with a clarity that defied the hazy logic of sleep. He could smell the rain-slicked stone and hear the distant, rhythmic dripping of a faulty gutter. As weeks bled into months, Elias became obsessed. Every line he drew during the waking hours, a curving boulevard, a jagged tenement, a sprawling plaza, manifested in his mind with architectural precision. The city, which he called Ocularis, was a masterpiece of Victorian brutalism and impossible geometry. It expanded behind his eyes like a blossoming flower of brick and mortar. He began to spend 16 hours a day at his drafting table, fueled by caffeine and a frantic need to see what lay around the next corner of his internal metropolis. But the fascination turned to a cold, creeping dread when he realized the city was no longer a passive construction. One night, while walking through the central district of Ocularis in his sleep, Elias found a shop that he hadn't drawn. Its windows were filled with mirrors, and inside, a figure sat at a desk, hunched over a map. With a jolt of terror, Elias realized the figure was drawing him. The ink on the phantom cartographer's page moved in real time, tracing Elias's path through the streets, marking his heart rate, his pupil dilation, and the frequency of his breaths. The city was mapping its creator, dissecting the cartographer with the same clinical curiosity he had used to build its walls. Elias tried to stop drawing, but the withdrawal was physical. His hands shook and his vision blurred until he returned to the parchment. He felt like a prisoner in his own skull, watched by thousands of unseen eyes from the windows of a city he had built. He decided to find the center, the very first point he had ever drawn, to destroy the map from the inside. He navigated through the labyrinthine streets of Ocularis, the ink-black shadows stretching toward him like grasping fingers, until he reached a small, humble shack at the heart of the city. Inside the shack sat a man who looked exactly like Elias, but with eyes that had seen 1,000 years of winter. On the walls were thousands of maps, each one slightly different, each one a version of Ocularith. The elder Elias looked up, his quill stilled. "You're early," he whispered, his voice sounding like the rustle of ancient paper. "Or perhaps you're exactly on time." The truth hit Elias with the weight of a falling mountain. This city was not a creation of his imagination, nor was it a haunting. It was a vault in a future that Elias had already lived, a future of fire and silence where the world was erased by a nameless catastrophe. He had discovered the secret of mnemonic architecture. Each time the world ended, Elias would retreat into his own mind, drawing a city to house his memories, his soul, and the souls of those he couldn't save. The city was mapping him because it was checking the structural integrity of its host. The elder Elias was not a ghost. He was a previous version of himself, a long-forgotten self that had built this refuge to hide from the inevitable future that was currently chasing him in the waking world. The scratch of the quill wasn't a creative act, it was a repair job. As the walls of the shack began to shimmer with the encroaching light of a world ending once again, Elias took the quill from his older self's hand. He realized that to survive the coming fire, he didn't need to stop drawing, he needed to draw faster. Elias didn't just take the quill, he felt the weight of every version of himself that had ever held it. The room in the center of the city began to expand, the walls dissolving into an infinite library of every street, every brick, and every person he had ever invented. He realized then that the citizens he saw in the distance, the flower girl on the corner of Inkwell Street, the stoic watchman at the North Gate, weren't figments. They were the saved. They were the refugees of a dozen different apocalypses, living in the only sovereign territory left in the universe, the space behind a cartographer's eyes. The elder Elias gestured toward the window, where the sky of Ocularis was beginning to fracture. Cracks of blinding, white nothingness streaked across the violet firmament. "The future is catching up," the old man rasped. "The nothing that erases the world outside has finally found the scent of your mind. It doesn't just want to destroy the world, it wants to destroy the memory of it." Elias looked at the map on the table. It was no longer a two-dimensional drawing. It was a topographical pulse. He saw that the city wasn't just a place to hide. It was a vessel. The reason the city had been mapping him so aggressively was to prepare for the great transition. His physical body in the waking world was failing. Under the strain of housing an entire civilization, the mapping was a biological audit, calculating exactly how much longer his heart could beat before the city had to become independent of his flesh. As the white cracks in the sky widened, Elias saw something through the fissures. It wasn't just void. He saw a laboratory in the waking world, filled with high-tech sensors and white-coated technicians. He saw his own body lying on a slab, his head encased in a neural mapping array. The elder Elias gripped his arm. "That is the future you fled." They didn't just want to study your maps. They wanted to colonize them. They realized that a mind that can create a stable, physical reality is the only real estate left in a dying universe. You didn't build Ocularis to hide from a natural disaster. You built it to hide from them. The people who would turn your soul into a gated community for the elite. The city hadn't been mapping Elias to see if he was healthy. It had been mapping him to find the back door. The technicians in the waking world were using the city's own internal mapping system to find a way in. The figure in the mirror shop wasn't a version of Elias. It was an avatar of the scientists, a digital scout sent to claim the territory. Elias realized the only way to save the thousands of souls living behind his eyes was to sever the connection to the waking world entirely. He had to draw a closed loop. He began to draw at a feverish pace, but he didn't draw at a feverish pace, but he didn't draw new streets. He drew a horizon that folded back on itself. He drew a sky made of mirrors and a sea made of ink. He transformed the city of Ocularis from a refuge into a Klein bottle of reality, a space with no outside and no inside. As the technicians in the waking world screamed in frustration as their monitors went dark, Elias felt his physical heart stop for the final time. But he didn't die. He simply stepped out of the shack and into the rain-slicked streets of the city. He was no longer the cartographer. He was a citizen. The city was finally free, existing in the white space between was and will be, a map that had finally become the territory.